He never flinched when the man pulled the trigger. He didn't raise a hand, didn't shout, didn't reach for a weapon. Ibrahim Traoré simply looked him in the eyes, and for a split second, time stopped. The bullet misfired. Some said it was divine, others called it fate, but those who were there remember it as a moment when fear lost its power. The man dropped the gun. His knees hit the floor. He was not a foreign mercenary, not a faceless rebel. He was one of their own, a former volunteer, a man who once saluted the same flag. Captured immediately, he was dragged through the corridors of military justice, head down, surrounded by guards with eyes colder than steel. But the president said one sentence: "Bring him to me, alone." The advisors protested. The generals objected. But Ibrahim Traoré had already removed his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and was waiting in the courtyard with no security in sight. The assassin was brought in, his face swollen from interrogation, his wrists bruised by handcuffs. He expected fury. He expected execution. Instead, he heard silence. Then a voice, not loud, but steady. "Why?" Traoré asked. The man trembled. "My family," he whispered. "They promised safety, money. If I did it, they said you would never know." Ibrahim nodded once. Then, to the shock of every guard watching from a distance, he stood, walked over, and untied the man's hands himself. "You didn't fail me," he said. "You failed yourself. You forgot who you are." Then he turned and left. No prison, no firing squad, just one command: let him go home. The news spread like wildfire, not because a plot had been foiled, but because a president had chosen forgiveness over vengeance. Across the country, people wept. In markets, elders recited the story like scripture. In schools, children reenacted the scene with wooden sticks and folded paper pistols. "He forgave him," they said. He really forgave him. And something changed. The air felt different. Fear gave way to faith. That night, hundreds of former rebels came out of hiding, not to fight, but to surrender. Some walked for days just to kneel at the steps of the Capitol, begging for a second chance. They brought back stolen rifles. They burned propaganda leaflets. They offered themselves, not as soldiers, but as shields. They said, "We will stand between you and the next bullet." The army was stunned. Intelligence services couldn't explain it. But Ibrahim Traoré didn't need an explanation. He had long understood that power earned through fear is always borrowed. Only love returns without being summoned. From then on, something unheard of began to happen. On public tours, mothers would line the roads, pushing their children forward to touch his hand. Not because he was a president, but because they saw in him something no suit could carry: mercy. When his convoy passed through towns, unarmed men would form human barricades, not to block, but to protect. When he visited conflict zones, old women would stand in front of him saying, "If they want you, they must shoot through us." He refused to exploit it. Never asked for loyalty, never printed his face on flags, but the people did it anyway, because they had seen something greater than strategy. They had seen a man who looked his killer in the eyes and chose to see a human instead. In a continent where betrayal had become normal and revenge a ritual, Ibrahim Traoré had broken the pattern. He taught them that forgiveness is not weakness. It is the weapon that disarms hate. And so, when whispers of another plot emerged months later, the military stood ready. But it wasn't the soldiers who acted first. It was the villagers, the students, the taxi drivers, the farmers. They surrounded his residence at dawn, arm in arm, backs turned to the gates, watching the roads. No one told them to come. No reward was promised. But when a journalist asked why they were there, one man said simply, "Because he would have spared us, and that's why we'll die before we let him fall." His name was never made public, not officially. No press conference, no leaked photograph. Ibrahim Traoré never spoke of him again, not because he wanted to erase him, but because he believed in a redemption that didn't need an audience. But among the soldiers, they began to whisper his name again, not in anger, but in wonder. He returned to his village under moonlight. No uniform, no weapon, only a body that carried shame like weight and eyes that avoided mirrors. His family, once promised safety for his betrayal, had already fled, fearing retribution. He came home to silence. But he didn't collapse. He didn't hide. Instead, he asked to work with the widows of the conflict, the ones who had lost husbands, brothers, sons in wars he had once helped fuel. At first, they spat at him. One even struck him with a sandal, but he didn't resist. He kept coming, day after day, hauling water, mending walls, fixing broken tin roofs in the heat. They didn't trust him, but they watched him. And slowly, suspicion gave way to curiosity. No one paid him, no one thanked him, and he never explained. One day, a child followed him, asking, "Why do you work if no one likes you?" He smiled and said, "Because someone once saw something good in me, even when I didn't." Word reached the capital. Ibrahim Traoré heard about it from a passing VDP officer, but he said nothing, only nodded and returned to the day's briefing. But something had shifted. A man who once pulled a trigger had become a builder, a protector, a listener. He never sought forgiveness from the nation. He never stepped into the spotlight. But when floods hit a nearby province the following year, and an old bridge began to collapse with women and children trapped on the far side, it was he who crossed the broken planks one by one, carrying the smallest children on his back. He didn't make it back. The bridge gave way on his last trip. They found his body 3 days later downstream, arms still wrapped around a 5-year-old boy, still alive. The villagers buried him in silence. They planted no sign, no monument, only a tree. But the story spread. And one day, during a visit to that province, Ibrahim Traoré passed by that tree. He paused, stared at it, then took a knee, not as a leader, but as a man who understood what it meant to be saved by your own mercy. He didn't say a word, just rested his palm on the soil, then stood, turned to the crowd and said only this: "Some men die as traitors. Others choose to die as protectors. What matters is what they do in the time they're given back." And with that, he walked away, leaving behind not just a tree, but a truth that echoed louder than any anthem. Forgiveness can rewrite the ending. He never knew the name of the man who saved him. He was only 5 years old when the flood took everything: his home, his mother's stall, the bridge that once connected the village to the road. All he remembered was slipping into water, screaming for a voice that would never return, and then arms, rough, strong, shaking, lifting him from the current. He remembered the warmth of a chest pressed to his back. He remembered a whisper, something about "hold on." He remembered silence, then light, then being carried into the arms of a crying woman. He didn't know that the man who saved him was once the same man who tried to kill the president. He didn't know that the tree planted near the river was not for a fallen soldier, but for a redeemed one. But something in him always felt different. He grew up with a name that no one could quite explain: Musa, like the president's father. His grandmother said it was the name of a protector. He studied hard, listened well, spoke less. He never wanted to be famous. He just wanted to understand why someone would die for a child they didn't know. And so, when he turned 20, he joined a quiet volunteer corps, not the military, but a unit that repaired bridges in flood-prone regions. One day, while working near the same river where his life had been saved, he found a small rusted bracelet buried in the mud. On the inside, faint letters: "One life is still a life." He showed it to no one. Just sat under the tree that shaded the bank and cried for the first time in years. Years later, that same young man, now older, wiser, with a calm in his voice that reminded people of someone else, stood in front of a group of school children. They were learning about the history of the country, the revolution, the assassinations, the forgiveness, the floods. One child raised her hand and asked, "Is the story true? That someone once tried to kill Ibrahim Traoré and then died saving someone else?" He smiled, looked out the window toward the tree in the distance, and said softly, "Yes, and I was the someone else." The children were silent, not from confusion, but reverence. "Why did he save you?" another asked. The man knelt, meeting their eyes. "Because someone once saved him with forgiveness," he said. "And when you're forgiven, truly forgiven, you stop destroying and start protecting. Even if no one ever knows." That night, as the children returned home, they didn't tell stories about war or presidents or parades. They spoke about a man who once gave his life not to fight, but to save one. And in that story, they found something rare in their world. Not just hope, but proof that mercy, once planted, does not die. It grows in trees, in bridges, in people, and in boys who become men, who never forget the arms that held them in the water and the silence that saved their lives.